Hello, hi, and welcome. If you're new here, my name is Sarah, and this is Wicked Reading. So today we're going to talk about all the books that I read in September, and I gotta say, I think that this was one of my best reading months ever. I have 3 5-star books to talk to you guys about. 2 of them were featured in vlogs, so you might know what they are, but the third one has not been featured on my channel yet, and I am so excited to talk about it. Before I get too ahead of myself, real quick, I wanted to let you guys know I did end up making a Bookstagram account, and I'm super excited, so that's going to be linked down below if you want to follow me on there. Second off, I want to apologize now if my voice ends up going pretty grainy at any point in this video. I am just now getting over being sick for the last week and my throat is pretty beat up from it. I'm going to try to go through these really quick, so hopefully we don't get to that point, and I got plenty of water with me, but let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to go through my stats really quick for September. I just do this through Storygraph. It's the easiest for me. So in September, I read a total of 8 books, which equated to 2,535 pages. 8 is about average for me. They were all somewhat longer format. I didn't read any novellas or manga this month, so it's on a little bit of the smaller end for me. But my top moods were dark, tense, mysterious, and then there's some reflective, emotional, funny, and challenging moods thrown in there as well. For my top genres, I read mostly horror and then followed by thriller, literary, LGBTQIA+, and then mystery. I actually didn't read any fantasy books. Some of these books feature fantasy elements, but yeah, it was mostly all horror and thriller this month. I did rate all the books that I read, and it averaged to 3.81 with 1 2.5 star, 3 3 stars, 1 4 star, and 3 5 stars. So I am going to go in the order that I read the books in, and the first book I read for the month of September was Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. In this book, we are following our main character, who is a widowed older woman, and she lives in the woods with her dog. When they are out walking one day, she comes across a note in the middle of these woods, and it says, "Her name was Magda. Nobody will ever know who killed her. It wasn't me. Here is her dead body." But there is no body around this note, and our main character becomes extremely obsessed with this idea of this Magda person and tries to figure out the story of who this Magda person was. So this book is 1000% just stream of consciousness. It's very Ottessa Moshfegh feeling. We are just stuck in the mind of this character for the whole book, and the lines really start to become blurred between what's reality and what is just happening in this character's head. This book is mostly character driven. There's really not much plot that happens, so you definitely need to be into stream of consciousness, character-based books. This was okay for me. I didn't connect with it the way that people who give it this book 5 stars did. I ended up giving this book 3 stars. I really appreciate it. It's definitely a very unique story, and I appreciate that it's different and tried to do something, but it was just a little bit too meta for me, a little bit too artsy-fartsy for me to get into fully. And at a certain point, those lines between reality and story in this character's mind became so blurred that I kind of just stopped caring what happened in the book because it just felt like there was no purpose. I have a vlog on this. I have a vlog with this and the 2 next books I will talk about. If you want to hear me talk more about it, this one in particular I talk quite a bit more about in the vlog, but I'm going to leave it at that for this video. Next up, I read Jawbone by Monica Ojeda. In this book, we follow a group of these 6 high school girls that go to this private Catholic school. We mostly focus on 2 girls from this group named Annalise and Fernanda, who have been best friends since they were little. Fernanda ends up getting kidnapped by one of their teachers, Miss Clara, and that's where I'm just gonna leave the synopsis for it. This book, I loved this book. This was 5 stars. This book changed my brain chemistry. I absolutely loved it, but I will say it's definitely not going to be for everybody. This is definitely much more of a literary horror where there's very much horror elements, very disturbing aspects to this book, but it's very literary in the way that the formatting is very experimental feeling. There's jumps of different types of formatting, and we jump through a couple of different characters. We also jump through quite a bit of timelines, and the book's not told in a chronological order, so I can understand it getting confusing, but the writing of the story was just so amazing to me. It says a lot without spoon feeding anything to you, and it brings up a lot of important conversations and interesting discussions surrounding teenage years and these very formative years. It does kind of touch on sexuality, and because these girls are part of this Catholic school, religion plays a decent part in a lot of these themes as well. It also touches on violence. There's kind of quite a bit of themes going on in this book. Overall, it's one of those kind of weird, bizarre books that you don't know where it's ever going to go. And it's not a quick skim through type of book. It's one of those books you can dissect the text for quite some time. The character work just was phenomenal to me. I loved the complexity of these characters in this book. This is just one of those books that personally, it just hit me so hard, and I can talk about this book for hours. I loved it, and it was a very easy 5-star for me, but I don't necessarily recommend it to everybody. You have to be into all the things I've already talked about, and there are some trigger warnings for this book that include like self-harm, and some other stuff. I can't even really think of anything off the top of my mind, but I know that it does delve into some very deep, disturbing topics at times. The key words I would use for this book were unsettling, unhinged, bizarre, but also brilliant. Next up, I read Just Like Mother by Anne Hetzel. In this book, we open up with our main character, Maeve, who is, I don't know how old, maybe like 10 or something. She's a younger child, and she ends up being rescued from this cult. Then we flash forward to her in her 30s, and she decides to do a DNA test in order to try to connect with her cousin, who is also within the cult, who she's been separated from since. And they end up getting matched and decide to meet up. Her cousin Andrea has become a somewhat like technological icon, where she is part of this industry that creates really realistic baby dolls in order for women who have either lost a child or want to have a child or so on and so forth, can either like have this baby doll to relieve their trauma or to practice various things. So she's in this industry geared towards these realistic dolls for mothers. Once they reconnect, Maeve really starts to become very immersed in Andrea's world, and she starts to feel very disconnected from her previous life before reconnecting with Andrea. Now, when I picked up this book, all I had known about it was that there was a cult involved, and that's all I went in knowing. While I will agree that there's a cult involved, I just want to say, don't pick up this book because you want to be immersed in a cult or have like the nitty-gritty details of what goes on in said cult. That's not the type of book that this is. It doesn't really get into that very much. We do have some flashbacks, but it's not really at its core surrounding Maeve and Andrea as children within this cult. It's just kind of like their background story, and you see how it comes up in their adult life. But it's just like not necessarily the most forefront theme of this book. I didn't really connect with. It's definitely much more of a thriller, and I do have difficulties with thrillers a lot of the time. I'm willing to give them a try, but they have a lot to prove to me, and this one just didn't do it. I saw a lot of stuff coming. It did go farther than I thought, but it wasn't in a good way. I didn't like how far it went, and I feel like the themes that this book may have been trying to give got lost. I think at its core it's really supposed to be about motherhood and choice and all of that, but at a certain point I feel like it lost what point it was trying to make about that. It was fine. It wasn't a bad book. I just didn't connect that much with the characters. They were fine. I just didn't connect that much with the themes. They were fine. I just didn't like the way that they were executed. And I just didn't really connect with the plot. This book overall was just a big kind of meh for me, so I gave it 2.5 stars. But that's not to say I discourage people from reading it. I still recommend it to people that like thrillers. I just recommend it with the caveat that don't expect necessarily a cult to be the main focus throughout the entirety of the book. So yeah, that's just like Mother. After that, I picked up Rouge by Mona Awad. This book just released this month. I had it pre-ordered and I started reading it as soon as I got it. I was very excited to get into this one. So this book follows our main character, Maribel, and she is raised in Southern California with her mother, Noelle, and both of them are very obsessed with skincare, maintaining youth, skin routines, skin serums, stuff like that. Maribel ends up moving away to Montreal when she is older, but then one day gets a call that her mother has tragically died. So Maribel has to travel back to California in order to kind of take care of her mother's end of life affairs, deal with her condo, stuff like that. Maribel ends up finding a lot of strange things around her mom's condo. The mirrors are cracked. She has all these strange empty red bottles all over the place. While Maribel is in California, she ends up stumbling upon this spa that she's never been to before, and the people there are very uncanny. They actually had known Noelle when she was alive and seemed to be very drawn and interested in Maribel as well. And that's where I'm going to leave the synopsis, but at its core, it does surround kind of like the beauty industry. Overall, I did end up really enjoying this book. It's kind of like a twisted, dark fairy tale, and it does actually say on the inside cover, it is like Snow White meets Eyes Wide Shut. I'm not gonna lie, halfway through this book, it was starting to drag a little bit for me. I liked when we started to get even more and more unhinged and get more into that direction. But the saving grace of this book was the final part and final act of this book, part 6. I absolutely loved the direction this book took at the end and what Mona Awad did to kind of tie it all together and create that climax and that resolution. So the ending ended up really saving this book for me. There's still some aspects of the book that I could have done without, like these side plots that I just don't feel like really added anything. And if it were shorter, I think it would have packed way more of a punch, the way that the ending was very punchy for me. But again, I did end up really liking it and gave it 4 stars. I do have a vlog where I share my reading journey for this book, and you can see how much it changes throughout the progression of this book for me. I ended up having to eat some of my words along the way, but if you're interested in that, I will link it below, and the next 2 books I will talk about will also be in that vlog as well. So next up, I listened to the audiobook for Looking Glass Lounge by Catriona Ward. This was a pretty anticipated read for me because I've really enjoyed my reads from Catriona Ward so far, but unfortunately this one just wasn't really it for me. So this book opens up with our main character, Wilder, and he is kind of a bit of a outcast, a little bit of an awkward kid, but he ends up going to this cottage by Whistler Bay and meets 2 other kids called Nat and Harper, and they end up becoming very good friends, and for the remaining of the summer they end up doing summer things, sharing ghost stories, and then something really traumatic ends up happening to this friend group. From there we do some time jumps where Wilder is writing about this experience, and then he meets somebody in college who ends up stealing that memoir and trying to create their own narrative, and they sell a book about that story, and then it gets into more drama and stuff. So that's the best I can do to explain this book. It's very much one of those a book within a book within a book, and like there's a lot of levels to this story that I felt like was too many levels. I was able to follow it and I understand how everything connected at the end, but I just didn't really care by the end, honestly. It was okay. I feel like the original story that Wilder and Nat and Harper experienced was like really good. It started really great. But then the rest of the book just kind of tears that apart and becomes way too much. It can very easily be too convoluted and confusing. The very end is quite a like soap opera. I ended up giving it 3 stars. Next up, I read another new release, and that was Black Sheep by Rachel Harrison. This was another one that I had pre-ordered, and I got it the day of publication and started immediately. This book, we follow our main character, Vesper, and she is this cynical 20-something-year-old, and she has been estranged from her family for the past 6 years. Her family is extremely religious and she wanted to separate herself from that and has been doing her own thing since. One night when she gets home, there's this red envelope waiting for her. When she opens it, it is actually a wedding invite to her cousin and ex-boyfriend's wedding, who were also part of that religious group and community. So she decides to travel back home for this wedding and reconnect with her family. So I'll leave it at that. I really enjoyed this story. I just really have been connecting with Rachel Harrison's writing. Just something about her writing really does it for me. It's very approachable, and most of the time the atmosphere is pretty like cozy and fun. I laugh a lot throughout her books, but then once in a while she'll just have a line that just like punches you right in the gut. And for me, she has this really great ability and unique skill to be able to merge these fun and cozy vibes while also having these very deep undertones. I really love her characterization as well. I always seem to love her main characters, and I really liked the underlying themes of this book. And there is aspects of a mother-daughter relationship in this book. It's not at the forefront. It's definitely more of a underlying theme that's not very in your face, but nonetheless, I really enjoyed it. I had a very fun time reading this book. I flew through it. I think I read it in 2 or 3 days. It is on the shorter side, and I did annotate quite a bit. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I did give it 5 stars. I did say in my vlog, there's kind of a caveat to that where I gave it 5 stars and I loved it, but it's just not as strong of a 5 stars as Such Sharp Teeth was for me, but it was still 5 stars nonetheless. Some of it was like predictable, but I don't think it's really the type of book that's trying to throw you off. Some of it was not predictable, and I had a fun time nonetheless with some of the reveals. So I really enjoyed this and I highly recommend it, but I do think that my 5-star is a little bit biased, and I'm just really connecting with this author. Okay, friends, so we have 2 books left, and none of these books were in vlogs or anything, so I'm so excited to talk about them. But the next book I read, well, I listened to the audiobook, but I also had the book from the library as well. I followed along some of the time, and that was Mary by Nat Cassidy. This book was so surprising to me. I have heard somewhat mixed things about this book, and it was on my radar for a while, but after hearing mixed things, it just like wasn't at the top of my list. But I decided to just kind of like go for it one day and get it from the library. Let me just say, the audiobook, if you're gonna read this book, you have to listen to the audiobook. This audiobook narrator was so phenomenal. She did not just read the book, she performed. She put her all into this book. It was such an experience. The audiobook was just so perfect and so fantastic. Not only was the narrator amazing, but I really did enjoy the story of Mary. So we follow our main character, Mary, and she is this perimenopausal woman who has just been this very unassuming type of person, really not standing out in a crowd, just kind of doing her thing, drifting through life, not making many meaningful connections. So then she eventually gets a call from her Aunt Nadine, who I absolutely loved, by the way. But she gets a call from her Aunt Nadine, who needs help because her daughter has left and she's very old. She's like 80 something, and she just needs help around the house. So Mary ends up going back to her hometown to help Aunt Nadine out. I want to read this because I didn't read the synopsis, so I don't want to like give anything away. It says, she starts experiencing visions of terrifying, mutilated specters, and she begins auto-writing strange thoughts and phrases. Mary discovers that these experiences are echoes of an infamous serial killer. So this book has quite a lot of elements going on with it, and I can definitely see people thinking that it's too much going on, and I respect that. There's like some supernatural elements, there's this whole religious small town feel, and there's this like serial killer that's attached to the story as well. So there are quite a bit of elements, but I found that they just were very well balanced, and the way it all kind of connected with Mary at the core of it, I appreciated the elements in the plot. Supernatural doesn't always work for me, but it did in this case, because what I ended up getting most out of this book was, at its core with Mary, it was just pure female rage and finding yourself, having your own voice, and There's a lot of, misogyny she deals with in the book, and then this whole discussion of this perimenopausal period for women and how that's treated and how the medical atmosphere is with women. It was so well done, and I am just so surprised because Nat Cassidy is a male author, so I know a lot of people would immediately kind of turn their noses up to that, but he did such a phenomenal job. And the author note in the back, in the audiobook, he reads his own author note, so I again highly recommend you listen to the audiobook, but also listen to the author's note. And I just really appreciated him addressing the fact that he wrote this story. The author's note is literally labeled, "What's this asshole doing writing about menopause?" He addresses it, and I just think he did it in such a respectful way. But yeah, so male author aside, the story was phenomenal and I loved it. Narrator was amazing. I loved the themes. And yeah, I mean, it's a pretty chunky book. It's one of the chunkier horror books that I've read. But for me, I was never bored. I was always ready and excited to jump back into the story. Loved it so much. The characters were great. The female Rage was amazing. Aunt Nadine was hilarious. This is definitely gonna be in my top 10 of the year. Yeah, I highly recommend it. So the final book that I read in September was another new release, and that was Camp Damascus by Chuck Tingle. So the only thing I knew going into it, and really the only thing that the synopsis says, nestled high up in the mountains is Camp Damascus, the self-proclaimed most effective gay conversion camp in the country. Here, a life free from sin awaits, but the secret behind the success is anything but holy. This book, this is a hard one to review. I was very excited for this book. The whole idea of a gay conversion camp in this horror setting was very appealing to me because I feel like that is a very deep and hard and important discussion to have, because gay conversion is like a real thing. It's a real life horror to be had. So I was excited to have a very deep emotional experience with said topic, but this book just sadly was very disappointing to me. This book is not YA, but it felt very YA. I just really did not appreciate the way that this was approached. Again, because we go in knowing about the camp, we should have just immediately kind of started with the camp, but we kind of wait for the character to figure out about the camp. And then once they do, I just did not like the direction that this book took. I feel like it should have been rooted a little bit more in reality because, again, this is such an important topic to discuss, but because of the approach it took, it just made it feel a little bit more goofy and not as serious as it should be. And the little conflicts along the way were very easily solved in this book. So then it added this element of feeling very low stakes, and there was no real tension that was building because of that. The whole theme of the book just felt very spoon-fed to the reader, which again makes it feel more YA to me. I will say I did like the main character. I forget her name. Rose. I did like Rose. She's neurodivergent, and it was at first I was like, this is definitely neurodivergent coded, but she does actually say that she's autistic, which again just spoon-fed me exactly what I was already trying to figure out as a reader. So she's neurodivergent. She has these quirks. And this book did start off very strong because she's very, very, very rooted in her religion. And so her reactions and her internal takes on things was pretty interesting in the beginning. But there's a certain turning point, and she just had no internal conflicts or qualms about anything. I'm not speaking out of personal experience, so I'm not trying to speak for anybody, but it's not easy to have to completely dismantle and disconnect from a religion that you have grown up so embedded in. And it's not easy to have parents that are also so deeply rooted in their religion to the point that they're sending a child to a gay conversion camp. I couldn't even imagine how difficult that is. And it just felt, again, like our character had no internal difficulties with that. So again, it made it feel not that serious. It made it feel low stakes. It made it feel like a very easy thing for people to go through. I mean, I did like the character for the most part. I just feel like she needed more internal and introspective conflicts along the way. And I did end up learning a lot of random trivia from this book, so I'll give it that. It wasn't horrible, and I do think it's still an important read. I would never tell anybody not to read this book. I just wish it were approached and executed differently. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I still recommend it if it sounds like something you're into. I think I just had a lot of personal issues with the direction. So that is everything that I read in September. Let's not talk about the fact that only 2 of those were actually on my fall TBR. My mood reading tendencies took over. So that's all I have today. Please let me know what your favorite and least favorite reads were of the month. I'm very curious to know. If you haven't yet, please give the video a like, subscribe for future content, turn on the bell notification, all the fun YouTube things that help your girl out, and I will catch you in the next video. Bye!